The first theme is this idea that 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 and I sort of frame it as and this is probably maybe the single overarching theme is that we think of capitalism and competition as synonyms, and I believe they are antonyms. I believe that a capitalist is someone who's in the business of accumulating capital. A world of perfect competition is a world where all the profits are competed away. So if you want to compete in a crazy way, you should open a restaurant. You will never make any money doing so. And at the other end of the spectrum, what I think everybody who is a founder or entrepreneur should aim to do is build a monopoly. And all the great companies that people have built are monopolies of one sort or another. And I sort of use Google as the extreme example on the other end, where it's an extremely capitalistic company. It makes enormous amounts of profits, and it's so capitalistic because it's had no competition since 2002, when it definitively distanced itself from Microsoft and Yahoo in the core search business. The opening line of Anna Karenina is that all happy families are alike, and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own special way. And I think the opposite is true of business. I think in business, all happy companies are different because they figured out something unique to do, and all unhappy companies are alike because they fail to escape the essential sameness that is competition. The Wall Street Journal ran an excerpt in my book. The chapter was entitled "All Happy Companies Are Different." They sort of took the chapter and they retitled it "Competition is for Losers," which got a little bit more attention from people, but it sort of really gets at sort of the core of this, because we normally think that losers are people who don't compete intensely enough. The people who are the losers are the ones who fail to compete really hard, and it's sort of like you have sort of a educational testing model, a grading model, sort of an athletics framework or something like that. A loser is someone who's not very competitive. And so if you say competition for losers, that sort of really gets at the core of this difference. And I think this monopoly versus competition idea, there's sort of an intellectual reason people don't understand it. And it's very poorly understood, I think, even in Silicon Valley, because the people who have monopolies pretend not to have them, and the people who don't have monopolies pretend to have them. And so it gets kind of confusing. So if you, and the way you do this rhetorically is, if you have a monopoly and you don't want the government to look into it too much, you will say that you are in a much, much bigger business. So if you're Google, you will never say that you're a search engine. You will say you're a technology company, and technology is a vast, incredibly competitive space. And you're competing with Apple on iPhones, and you're competing with Microsoft on Word documents, and you're competing with Facebook on social, and with the Detroit car companies with your self-driving car, and there's just competition everywhere. And if you and on the other hand, if you're in a completely competitive business, let's say you're trying to open a restaurant in London, which is, if you decide to do that after this talk this evening, and you try to get investors for your restaurant in London, this will be hard to do, and they'll say, well, it's a bad business, no one makes money, everyone just loses money when they open restaurants. And you will say, well, this is totally different from any other restaurant. It will be the only British, Nepalese fusion cuisine within a 5-block radius of the LSE. And so you sort of tell an idiosyncratic fictional story where it's too small. And so because people are constantly telling these fictional stories that distort what's going on, there is this real failure to understand the centrality of this monopoly versus competition dichotomy. But I think it's not just an intellectual failure. I think it is also a sort of a psychological failure, and I think that there's something where we find competition strangely reassuring. We find it validating. When you compete for things, you think there are lots of people doing it, and there's sort of is this perception of safety in crowds. If a lot of people are trying to get something, it must be valuable, and therefore it. Whereas if nobody's trying to do something, that's already really, really uncomfortable. And I think this, the word ape already in the time of Shakespeare meant both primate and to imitate. And there is this rather disturbing aspect of human nature where people are ape-like, sheep-like, lemming-like, unbelievably herd-like, and we're sort of attracted to doing things that other people do. We're attracted to compete for all these, and compete the most intensely for things that often matter the least. And you know what competition does is it does make you better at whatever you are competing on. And I'll give the high school athletics. You're on like a swim team in high school, and you will focus on the other people on your swim team, and you will get to be a better swimmer. But it always comes at the price of losing sight of things that are perhaps more important or more valuable. I think that that's always sort of this distortion. There's a classic Henry Kissinger line about his fellow professors at Harvard, where the battles are so intense in academia because the stakes are so small. And you always think, on one level, you think this is a sort of a description of insanity. It's like, why would the battles be so intense if there's so little at stake? But it's on another level, it is just the logic of the situation working its way out. When the differences are tiny, you have to fight incredibly hard to differentiate yourself, and the smaller the differences get, the smaller the stakes get. Paradoxically, the more you have to fight to get ahead. And so I do think we should always ask whether it really makes sense to try to go through the tiny, tiny door through which everybody's trying to cram through when there's a giant gate, perhaps just around the corner that no one is even thinking about taking.